So as I mentioned in the previous video, I had a horn sent to me so that way I could install some snow cones on it. So here is how I made the brackets to put those cones onto the bells and how I mounted the cones on the bells. So this is the starting material, or the raw material for the cone brackets. It is a strip of aluminum that is 1/16 of an inch thick by 3/4 of an inch wide, and I need to cut this into 15 2-inch long strips. And so for those keeping track at home, that means I need 2.5 feet of this material. So the fact that my hardware store only sells this in 4-foot lengths is not a bad thing, because that is plenty of material for an entire horn's worth of cone brackets, plus a little bit extra if I want to do other bells or need repairs, or I want to do a 3-chime or a single chime or whatever. So so the next task, like I said, is to just chop this up into little strips. And here's my little supervisor, huh? Alright, so I got all the material chopped up into 2-inch long strips. That's gonna... Oh, hi there. That's gonna be the starting point for my cone brackets. And again, the production cones, railroad shop cones, would use stainless steel. I do this with aluminum because it's easier to work with and cut and bend and drill and all that stuff. But of course I cut all these strips without, and then I realized that I didn't show how I did that, which, you know, some people like to see. So here is a scrap piece that's just a little bit too short to use for a cone bracket, but it is a good example of how I did this. So all I did here is I basically marked it with a Sharpie where I wanted to cut, and then I stick it into a X-Acto miter box with a razor saw. And I paid special attention to angle the saw at the top and the bottom. Get the edges cut a little bit deeper than the center. It's a lot easier to hold when it's longer too. But basically all I do is I cut a little groove into it there. You don't have to cut all the way through, because then all you do is you bend it back, bend it forward, and then it just snaps. And what that does, let's see, it leaves an edge that has a partial smooth cut. You can see that on the top here, possibly, and then a rough edge. And then the next step in this process is to clean up the sharp corners and rough edges. Alright, so to smooth out the edges, I'm going to once again turn to one of my old standby favorites, misuse of the Dremel cutting wheel. And please, for the love of God, wear safety glasses if you do that, because it's really easy to shatter those wheels when you do that. But now we end up with a piece that has a nice clean edge and no sharp corners. So not only does this look a little bit better, but it also is far less dangerous to work with. Alright, so the next step is to clean them up and shine them. It's a good looking horn, and so I want the brackets to match. So they've got these little black spots from the manufacturing process, and then because it's in extrusion, they have the, you know, lines on them. And also they're kind of dull. So another one of my favorite horn working tools is these pre-soaped Brillo pads. So we'll get wet everything down here. So these Brillo pads, I'll turn that off. These Brillo pads are super fine steel wool that are then impregnated with soap. And so makes things really easy to work with. Put some pressure down on there. How do I move the camera when my hands are all soapy? But anyways, as you can see, cleans up really nice. And the black marks didn't completely get off there. I'll either scrub this again or I'll try with some alcohol, rubbing alcohol, and see if I can get that off. But yeah, this looks just worlds better just after a quick scrub. Alright, so for our cone bracket assembly line, there's two basic methods that you can use to make these. You can either drill the holes first and then bend them, or bend them and then drill the holes. For me personally, I find it's easiest to drill holes first and then bend. If you do that method though, be warned that it likes to bend right in the middle of the hole where the material's thinner rather than further down where it needs to be. I'll show you how I do this a little bit later on, but that's just a personal preference. As for the actual process, I mean, hopefully if you're watching this video you know how to use a hammer and a punch and drill bits and drills and all that, so I'm not going to show that stuff. But here's what I do. So first off, I go and mark where I want to drill my holes. Then I take a small punch and make a divot in the material. That's just to center the drill bit. Drill a pilot hole with a 1/8 drill bit. Just because drilling through something this thin with a larger diameter like the 1/4 inch is difficult and kind of dangerous on thinner material like this. Enlarge that hole with the 1/4 inch and then bend our bracket. And so yeah, not much to it. So anyways, here is a finished bracket. Now to do the other 14. Okay, so the last step in making the cone brackets is to take the straight pieces that I've drilled and bend them at a roughly 45-degree angle. So the very first ones of these I ever made, I copied them off of some factory cone brackets that I had, and ever since then I've just been bending them and, you know, doing everything via the precision process of TLAR. And for those not familiar with this fine precision engineering work, TLAR is an acronym that stands for "That Looks About Right." So anyways, so what I have is, oh, and just as a quick side note, this is my grandfather's old bench vise, and it's really cool that I got it and I'm still using it. So anyways, I got a couple pieces of cardboard taped into the jaws so that way I don't get the jaw marks on the aluminum. And then this piece of scrap here is actually a gauge that I cut, measured and cut so that I know how far to insert the piece to bend it. So all you do is, you know, just chuck it in there And you just push it over and bend it. And there's really not much to it. Like I said, TLAR, yeah, thereaboutish. Take it out. Let's compare that to other piece. Angle's a little shallow, so we'll stick it back in and bend it more. But yeah, that's how this goes. Not much to it, really. Okay, so here is the process for drilling the bells. Step 1 was to take a Sharpie and mark little dots where I want my holes to be. In order to get those properly spaced out, I printed and made these little paper templates that just fit inside the bell. That just kind of, gets an even 33 degrees everywhere. Next step was to make a little dimple mark with a Dremel engraving tool. And it's not that big. And the purpose of that is just to make sure that the drill bit doesn't wander around on the aluminum. Next step was to drill 3 32nd pilot holes. And then last step is to drill them out to 1/4 of an inch. So yeah, and these ones are put fairly close to the edge just for aesthetics, so that way the edge of the brackets line up with the edge of the bell. For a horn that's going to go into service and horns that came out of Amtrak Beech Grove, the holes were just a little bit farther in. But this way it's going to look a lot nicer just for this. And this particular horn, we're focusing on the looks more than, because it's not going to go on a locomotive. So yeah. Anyways, that is the process for drilling out the bells. Okay, so the next step in this process is to loosely mount the cone brackets. Not quite that loose, but enough so that there's a little bit of play in them. Now, a couple notes here. Number 1, on the 1, the 2, and the 3A bells, the holes for the brackets are drilled so that there is 1 screw at the top, 2 at the bottom of the foot. On the 4A and the 5, however, the brackets are not mounted flush with the top because, of course, the bells are not sitting flat on the manifold, they're sitting at a 90-degree angle. So that way the brackets do line up correctly. And that's just for aesthetics, but it's really easy to take that extra few minutes to figure out the orientation on those bells. As for hardware, to mount the brackets to the bells, you're going to need a 1/4 inch bolt that is 3/4 of an inch long. This particular owner of this horn, he wants flange bolts, and so that's what he gave me to use on this horn. If you're going to use, however, standard hex head bolts or screws or whatever, you're going to want to put a flat washer on the bolt before you put it through the bell, and then put the bracket on, and then another flat washer. And I like to use the nylon insert lock nuts, but you can use standard nuts. If you do use standard nuts, just put a lock washer between the flat washer and the nut, so that way everything stays in place. And either the lock nuts or the lock washers are very important because the horn produces a lot of vibration, and if you don't do that, then your cones are just going to vibrate loose and fall off after a little bit. And I have my supervisor here making sure everything goes smoothly. Alright, so once the brackets are loosely mounted, then you test fit the cones. And there are 3 different sizes of cones. The largest goes on the number 1, the medium size goes on the 2 and the 3A, and then the smallest go on the 4A and the 5. Now the reason for having the brackets loosely mounted, each of the cones has these weld seams on the bottom of them, and obviously you can put your cones however the heck you want, but just for aesthetics it's nice to have those weld seams all towards the bottom, because when it's all said and done, this is just going to look a little bit nicer if that's the case. Alright, anyways, so for having the brackets loosely mounted is for this purpose, is to figure out where exactly you want the cone to line up, so that way you can know where to drill it out at. Now, I had this fitted for this demo, but then of course I messed with it and all hell broke loose. But let's see. So yeah, something like that. So anyways, you want to just fiddle with the cone, move the cone around, move the brackets around until you get a hole in the cone lined up more or less with a hole in the bracket. As such. Doesn't need to be perfect, because again, that's why the brackets are loose, is to get everything moved around a little bit. Now at that point, we're going to go and take the trusty Sharpie and then mark, if it writes. Okay. Draw on the hardware bag, that works. Okay. And then mark on the cone which hole it is that you need to enlarge. And that's not neat, it's not perfect, but it doesn't need to be, it just needs to be visible. So we're going to repeat this process of getting the cones fitted on every single bell and getting them marked for which hole we need to enlarge. Alright, so to drill out the holes for mounting the cones, you have to either gradually increase your drill bit size, which is time consuming and frustrating, or you get one of these tools. This is called the step drill. Trying to drill a large diameter hole in thin sheet metal all at once is very dangerous, so this tool makes really quick work of it. You basically just stick this in whatever hole you want to enlarge, and you know, and the step drill is designed so that it gradually increases the diameter of the hole to whatever size you need when you're drilling through thin sheet metal. So that's what you do, and that part is done. So now it's a final cleanup and polishing of the cones and mounting them. Alright, so once the cones have been drilled, it's just a simple matter of mounting them. You know, put them on the brackets, line the holes up, put the bolts through, somehow reach in there and get the washer and the nut threaded on, which is difficult and it sucks, and the edge of these cones are sharp, so wear gloves. Yeah, and then just tighten everything up. The easiest way I found to do that is with a ratchet wrench and a flat wrench. Take the flat wrench and... let me see this properly, actually. So you can stick the flat wrench in there, and that holds the nut, and then you just turn the bolt on the outside. And do that on the outside, and you know, do it 30 times for each bolt, and yeah, there we go. So all we need to do now is mount it to the manifold and try it out one last time. And assuming the owner is happy, which hopefully he will be, I'll send it back to him, and job done.